All right, folks, so it's about 1 minute after the top of the hour. We're going to have a lot of folks hopping on the line. There's quite a few people registered for this session, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Tara Zirkle. I'm Senior Manager for Community College Partnerships here at Raise Me. On your screen right now, you should see a poll. What we're trying to do is get a handle on who's in the room. So we know we have people from all kinds of different constituent groups represented. And in a moment, I'm going to reveal sort of who's in the room just so we can know who our neighbors are. And when you answer that, it's anonymous. So I'm going to give folks 1 second to respond. It looks about half of you have voted. So we'd love to hear where you're from. Oh, folks aren't seeing a poll. You know what? I bet I launched it before folks came in. Let me see if I can relaunch it. Okay, we're going to start over with the poll. So this is a fresh one. So if you voted before, let's have everyone vote again now that we have more of our neighbors in here. Oh, it's lighting up. Perfect. All right, I'll let this go for one more second. About 70% of you have voted. That's great. High school educators are pulling into the lead. It's not a competition, but you're in the lead. And I'm going to count it down. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. And let me share the results with everyone. So it looks like most of our neighbors today are high school educators, but certainly glad to see kind of a mix of folks across all different types of institutions in the room. So that helps us give us some framing for how to move forward. So now that we have more folks on the line, I'm just going to reintroduce myself. My name's Tara Zirkle. I'm Senior Manager for Community College Partnerships here at Raise Me. And our intention today is to do kind of a 30-minute lunch and learn overview of some creative ways to kind of communicate with students right now as we kind of navigate this new normal that we're all in. For some context on me, prior to joining Raise Me, I worked in the community college system in Pennsylvania for about 11 years. The last role I had was actually as a Dean of Online Education at Westmoreland County Community College, which is a little bit outside of Pittsburgh. And through that experience, I was fortunate to gain some insight into how to work with students remotely and some practices that we found to be effective at Westmoreland, as well as practices that we've sourced from elsewhere. So our intention again is to do a broad kind of big picture overview, and we will record this session and make this deck available to everyone just in case you on your own time want to drill a little bit deeper into some of the things we discussed. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of two different pockets. We're going to talk about communicating with students from kind of a big picture institutional perspective, but also from a classroom perspective as well. We'll talk both about strategies and about tangible pragmatic tools. And I'm trying to highlight some tools that you might be less familiar with, just to kind of get your gears thinking about what are some ways that we can really make sure that students are hearing from us, and that students feel cared for, and that we're communicating in ways that students are receptive to. And one thing that we wanted to stress too is when we think about what's important right now, what's most important right now is student well-being and the well-being of all of you. And what you're looking at is actually a survey of college presidents, and this appeared just a few days ago in Inside Higher Ed, where about 180 presidents were surveyed. And I imagine if we surveyed high school principals or district leadership or any number of education professionals, that this chart would look the same. Where the emphasis right now is really how do we care for our students. And I think the way that we communicate with them and try to be creative can really help us achieve that goal. So why is this timely, right? And I don't think anything in this slide is a surprise, but we know that students might be feeling information and communication fatigue. I think all of us are feeling a little bit of that. When I go through my personal email, it's everyone I've ever done business with has sent me a COVID-19 update, right? And I'm like, I don't know if I need that, for my place that I shopped at 2 years ago, but here it is. There's a lot of information out in the world. Students are reporting that they're feeling anxious and uncertain and want to feel connected. And a survey recently came out from RISE that said, and this is among college students, but probably applicable to high school students as well, students are dealing with high levels of anxiety, depression, stress. Students have been laid off, their families have been laid off, they don't have access to Wi-Fi, they're facing housing insecurity. And I know a lot of your institutions are trying to convey information to students about how they can manage these things that are difficult. So hopefully we'll share some tools today about ways that you can do that. So we're just going to go through a number of strategies. So one of my favorite strategies that I used to use with faculty, and I also used this when I did advising, was to do weekly video updates with students. And in that weekly video update, we would try to keep it under 2 minutes. And the focus of it was, what is important right now? What is the content for this week? What are the institutional updates for this week? What's going on in our community this week, and how can you get involved? And really trying to make the information bite-sized, personal. Students want to see you and have a conversation with you. We also found that these weekly video updates really helped with consistency. Sometimes when people get a lot of information, I know I feel this way, it's sometimes hard to sift through, well, that was true this week or last week, and what's true this week. So the weekly video updates are something that we highly recommend. Some tools that can help with that. YouTube allows you to make these videos for free. Many of you might have within your own IT departments tools as well. The thing that I like about YouTube is that the closed captioning feature on it is pretty good. So if you speak into it and turn that closed captioning feature on, it will automatically provide them for your weekly video update. And I know something that your institutions may be talking about is how do we communicate and make sure that we're being accessible as well, so that YouTube stream can really help with that. Strategy 2 for communication, and this is kind of big picture communication. And I know Jamie Griffin, who's on the line, has done this as well. Open office hours. Pick 1 to 2 hours per week if you're either teaching or advising, maybe you're an administrator, no matter who you are, and say to students, in this 1 to 2 hours a week, I guarantee you I will be sitting by my phone, I'll be on my Zoom, you can schedule an appointment with me, or you can just drop in. And what we're finding is sometimes students have questions that maybe we haven't thought of yet. And those open office hours can be a way to make sure that we really hear from students and they feel like they have some place to go. One thing I read recently on Twitter that I thought was so insightful was, the notion that when students come to college, they come to a physical place often. And now that they don't come to a physical place, us as educators, we are the college to them. So seeing you is seeing the college, and having kind of those open spaces where students can come in and ask about technology, policies, procedures, content is something that can be really helpful. Another part of this that we think can help with communication is keeping off-hour times open if you can. So many students right now, and I know many of us, this is happening in my household too, have multiple people who are working from home, multiple students who are at home, limited internet bandwidth, and maybe only 1 to 2 devices. So keeping some times open in the evening where students can communicate with you can be something that can be really, really helpful for a student who's kind of, fighting for mom's laptop while she's trying to work from home. Virtual town halls. This is something that I've seen both high schools and four-year institutions implement, where we, leadership or teachers or whomever, are setting up opportunities where they are kind of live casting, screen casting what's the state of their institution is. These are often held in the evenings and often held where families and community members can participate as well. I think this is something that's really building that connection that students need right now, but it's also kind of a high ROI way to convey a lot of information to a lot of people at one time, and then you can record it and have it available to your students and to your other constituents. Social media Ask Me Anything sessions. Old school phone calls. So I am hearing a lot right now that phone calls are actually working. And I think historically, when we think about calling students, and I've called students before, usually, not always, but a lot of the times when we've called students in the past, it's kind of maybe bad news, right? It's kind of maybe your bill is due, or maybe you didn't do as well as you wanted to on that test. If you start to follow some of these conversations that are happening right now, it actually seems like students have been really responsive to phone calls. Students are craving connection. Students are craving actually talking to someone, and students are responding. And what many institutions are doing is kind of doing open-ended phone calls to say, what do you need right now? What is confusing right now? And then connecting those students with resources that can help them. So if a student reveals, you know, I'm kind of food insecure right now, sometimes it's easier to have that conversation over the phone than it is to do it in a text or in an email or in a place where a student might feel, I don't want to put this into writing, but I still want to communicate it to you. TikTok. I don't know who on the line is familiar with TikTok, but when we think about Gen Z students, which is kind of like the student group that many of us are working with, TikTok is actually the most downloaded app in the Apple Store today, more than YouTube, more than Facebook, more than Snapchat. And what TikTok is it allows you to make little bite-sized fun videos where you can engage your students, and they're set to music. They're maybe 10 to 15 seconds long, and a lot of institutions have started to do this to actually encourage students to participate in kind of online social networking opportunities to say, hey, today at XYZ institution, it's pajama day. Make a TikTok of you wearing your pajamas, you know, and we'll put it on our page. So it's been really a great social engagement tool. Other institutions have used it to have contests to say, if you can make the most creative TikTok about, you know, what we're reading in English class, we're going to put you on our web page. It's pretty easy to use. You can add narratives to it, you can add images to it, but this is actually surpassing Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram as the platform that the majority of Gen Z students are on. Some other tools, and this is more for communicating with parents and students, and some of these might be things you're familiar with, but some of them might be new, and I tried to pull in some things that folks might not be as familiar with. So Remind, many of you might be familiar with that. This is kind of a text tool that allows you to send reminders to both students and parents about what's going on both in your classroom and in the larger institution. Google Sites, I'm sure most of the people on the call are familiar with Google Sites, but in Google Sites, you can kind of build your own website, classroom, repository for information. And one thing I would stress too is I've seen the most success with these tools if people use them consistently across a discipline or across an institution to keep students kind of from having that overload of having too many tools. Seesaw is a tool where students can build portfolios of their work, and they can use different mediums in that. So they can upload videos, images, and so forth. And it's been a really great engagement tool. One cool thing about it, though, is that students can actually share those portfolios with their families. So it's a way to keep the entire household engaged in what the student is doing. Weebly is similar to Google Sites, where you can kind of build blogs and a platform where you can communicate with students and post updates on coursework, institutional updates, and so forth. Students can also build their own sites on Weebly. So if you want to have your students build a site that kind of allows them to communicate with other students, but it can give them something remote to do to replicate some of the things you might be doing in a classroom. So instead of saying, you know, come to the board and draw a picture, it can be go onto Weebly and make a blog. And let me just move this over. EduBlogs is a blog site that is similar to, I'm trying to think of an example. It's a place where you can build blogs, but also students can build blogs. But there's also a social media aspect to it where students can communicate with each other and look at each other's blogs as well. ClassTag, ClassDojo, many of you might be familiar with those. A lot of the tools on these two sites are around texting. You can text your class, you can text individual students, you can text parents as well. Parent Square is a mass communication tool and app that allows maybe perhaps your entire district to communicate with a parent. So these are just some things that can kind of help you mostly get text messages out. And there's a lot of data coming out right now that text messages are actually the most effective way to communicate with students right now, specifically if the student is in a situation where Wi-Fi is kind of limited, that text message can be a little life raft for the student. Video options. I tried to include some things that folks might not be familiar with. So many of us are familiar with things like Zoom or GoToMeeting, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned some tools you might be less familiar with. So Animoto is a tool where you can go and make really sharp, professional looking videos. You can use their templates, you can add images, they have stock photos embedded in the site, where you can make something, for lack of a better term, that looks pretty slick. A thought that we had for this is if anyone's doing anything for graduation, or perhaps your graduation plans have changed for your students, it's a really easy tool where you can make a nice homage video to things that have happened over the past year. You can also use it in your classroom, though, to quickly say, these are the things that are important this week. VoiceThread is a tool that it's kind of social media-ish. I've used VoiceThread before, and VoiceThread's a tool where both students and educators can make and upload videos that respond to prompts. So say I'm teaching a literature course, I've assigned students some reading, maybe I put some images associated with that reading into VoiceThread, and then students can actually respond to that image. They can create their own videos, but it's a way to really build engagement. I know many of you are probably familiar with Facebook Live, but I just did want to note that that's always an option as well. Cast is something that is a screencasting tool that is similar to Twitch. And what Cast does, what Cast kind of specialty is allowing folks to share video. So say maybe you and your students, you have them watch part of a film, or you have them watch a YouTube video or an instructional video. If you use Cast to do that, you can share the video, and there's a discussion bar on the side that allows folks to watch the video and engage in the discussion all from the same platform. Snagit is my favorite video tool of all time. I'm not endorsed by Snagit. It's just something that I really like. It's a really easy screen capture tool. So let's say you want to make a tutorial about how to use something, how to use ClassDojo. Snagit literally is you push a button to start recording your screen and a button to stop recording your screen. And that's it. There's not a lot of bells and whistles on it. It's really, really, really user-friendly. Blackboard Collaborate is another tool that I've had success with, and many learning management systems kind of have these video tools. Blackboard Collaborate is kind of like Zoom that's produced by Blackboard. And in that tool, one thing that it does really well if you want to have some engagement and communicate with students is you can build breakout rooms for them, where you can kind of assign students to certain rooms. It has a really good whiteboard option where students can draw and share their screens and communicate with one another. It also allows you to record sessions as well. So these are some tools, some video options that might be a little less familiar to folks that might be helpful right now. And just some options for in-class communication. So in my classroom, how can I build things that allow me to communicate content, information, but also be really, really engaging? Some of these you might be familiar with, and some of them you might not. Classcraft, and I would love to know if anyone is using this just for my own personal curiosity. Classcraft is a tool that takes your content and kind of gamifies it. And basically what students do is they enter this world where they don't have lessons, they have quests, right? And students create avatars and they go into storylines, and it's really kind of speaks to the interest that students have in gaming. So instead of maybe collecting a grade for a quiz, they collect coins. And once they get so many coins, they can buy something. It's absolutely fascinating. I highly recommend that you give it a look over. Quizlet is a tool that allows you to make flashcards for students. So again, if you're trying to, that's something you might normally do in class with students. You might normally have them work together in groups and create some images or cards or something to share information. You can do that remotely with Quizlet. Kahoot, many of you are probably familiar with, and this is an interactive tool where you can make interactive games, surveys. Students can be on teams. You can set up questions where students respond with their phone. But this can be a way to kind of mimic what would I do in a classroom, right? I would have students maybe raise their hand or work in a small group. Kahoot allows you to do that remotely. Poll Everywhere is very similar. Poll Everywhere is kind of similar where you can pose a bunch of questions to your students and say, okay, and now log in with your phone and respond to the poll, respond to the question that you think is most correct. But it allows you to kind of mimic raising my hand in class, but in a remote setting. Padlet is sort of like Pinterest, but for education. So what you can do in Padlet is actually have your students kind of make boards. And on those information boards, they can post images, questions. Students can respond to prompts on other students' boards as well. But it's a way to allow them to organize their content in a way that you can see it, their peers can see it, in a way that the aesthetic of it really speaks to kind of Gen Z. Packback is, if anyone has ever used Reddit before, Packback is kind of like a very safe education version of Reddit, but for students. And on Packback, what students do is they ask discussion questions. And they could ask, how do we know the Earth is round? And then other students in the class respond to that question. And it's really interesting because the goal of it is that the students kind of respond to the questions themselves, and it increases the dialogue between the students. One thing I really like about Packback is Packback has its own internal moderators that actually moderate the content as well to make sure that everything's appropriate for your classroom. So it's a way to get students talking to one another, but to get them really curious where they can kind of ask anything, or they could respond to prompts that you put in. So really, really engaging discussion board. And then Wordle is a word cloud tool where you could ask students to say, when I think about, I'm trying to think what's relevant right now, lots of things, right? When I think about world affairs, what are the words that come to mind? And it actually teases out the word that is most prominent in what your students share. So these are just some in-class options that allow students to kind of replicate some of the things you might do face-to-face, but in that online format. But really the goal of all these tools is to keep students talking, to keep them talking to you, to keep them talking to one another. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention that RaiseMe has some tools as well that can help you communicate with students. So if you're using our educator portal, you can absolutely communicate to your students within the service that we have. One thing I would want to mention right now too, when we talk about communication and trying to keep students engaged, is that RaiseMe has launched a series of community service micro scholarships. So if your students right now are donating PPE to hospitals, or gathering food for food banks, or just generally being really good neighbors, they can log those achievements in Raise Me and absolutely earn scholarships for them. Another thing they can earn scholarships for right now is if they are doing virtual college tours. That is something they can absolutely add to their portfolio to make sure that they're earning scholarships for them as well. Right now, we have a number of tools focused on advising, mental health, teaching online, college preparation, that all kind of have a virtual or COVID-19 lens attached to them. And what I'll do after this session is make sure that folks have access to all the resources that we're compiling. And then the last thing I would share is that we do have some upcoming webinars that might be interesting to people in the room. So if you have any students that are thinking about being community college transfer students, we have 2 sessions next week that are overviews of how do I do that? What does transfer mean? Why might that be a good choice for me? And that's actually co-hosted with Oakton Community College in Illinois is going to be working with us on that. We have an overview as well on April 23rd for how we work with community college students. And then on April 29th, and I still need to get the RSVP link up for this, we are doing a best practices panel with leadership from 3 community colleges. So Ivy Tech, Santa Monica, and Oakton Community College are going to join us to actually share what's been working right now and what their learnings are from the past few weeks. And in that spirit, I'm actually going to throw up one last poll. We'd love to hear from everyone in the room. What's been most challenging with your students in regard to communication? So we can continue to develop content and tools and resources that might be most helpful to you. So I'm going to leave that up for a minute. And I'm also going to hop in the chat bar. I know the overview we gave today was very, very quick, so we wanted to keep it kind of lunchtime focused. But please feel free to drop any questions in that chat bar and we'll get back to them.
So Tara, I have been compiling a list. This is Jamie, by the way, everybody who's been chatting with me in the chat bar. I've compiled a list of the questions that we got. And so in order to be respectful of time, I thought that maybe you and I could try to put some brief answers together and maybe send that out with the webinar recording. I don't know how you feel about that, or if you wanted to try to address any of them now.
Yeah, I think that sounds really fair because we just hit 1:30 and I want to make sure that we can get the best answers possible, but please keep putting the the questions in the chat bar. And I did see a question about, will this material be available? Yes. We also have kind of a rubric that we've developed that outlines some popular virtual or remote teaching applications and tools. And it's a rubric that lists the tool, the purpose, and kind of where you can find it. And I can make sure that that rubric gets out to folks as well. Great. All right. Well, we appreciate everyone joining us. It was great to see everyone, and we hope to see you again at another session that we host. Thanks so much.